Mark, Tim, hey, congratulations on your new documentary, For the Living.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
More of a congratulations is being featured really, really soon at the Newport Beach Film Festival. How do you gentlemen feel about that?
Excited, right, Mark?
Very excited. It's a great festival. I've been there before. I've had films premiere there, and they do a great job, get a great audience, great venues. So we're honored to be a part of it and to launch the film there.
This Sunday, October 20th, 3 p.m.
Excellent. Well, let's start with the obligatory question first for your documentary is what sparked you folks to do this documentary in the first place?
Mark, you want to begin or you want me to begin?
Sure. Well, it was brought to our attention this remarkable event that happens every year called Ride for the Living. That is a annual bike ride from Auschwitz to the JCC in Krakow, 60 miles away, to raise awareness and raise funds for the Holocaust survivors that are taken care of at the Jewish Community Center. And it sounded like such a interesting yet a little bit bizarre thing to do. But when we started researching it and eventually going there to scout, we just got more and more intrigued by it and the people that take part in it and the excitement and enthusiasm. So we decided to, with our executive producers, to do this film. And the film over the last 5 years, we were slowed down a little bit for COVID, but the film really grew in scope and size due to the subject matter of not just being about the Holocaust, but to start to include other genocides and pose this question of do we still have that happening almost 70 years after the worst mass murder in history at Auschwitz. So we began a deep, deep investigation into it with the ride being the through line for the film, but the bigger story about why does this genocide keep happening over and over and over again. Tim?
Yeah, we had a conversation. Lisa Efris, who is our producer, is my wife. So, and she and Mark have known each other for eons. And when I was brought in to help the story, Mark and I sat down, and the more questions I asked about the event itself, and why that route, why that date every year, it became clear to me that the entire purpose for the event was it was a collective act of empathy, because you're literally riding in the footsteps of this 10-year-old little boy who had been liberated in 1945, who is still alive today, by the way, and is a major player in the film. And as they make this journey, it was made clear that the thought process of each participant is constantly churning about what this young boy walking through a war zone between Russia, the Russian advancing forces, and the fleeing Nazi forces, what it was like and what he was going through and what kind of physical peril he was in, but also psychologically what he was going through, because the entire countryside was littered with rabid anti-Semitism. So once you have that one pillar of the film, empathy, in place, then you start to think about the other extreme of human nature, which just so happens to be represented at Auschwitz-Birkenau, which we would all, I think, agree is probably one of the pitch blackest places on planet Earth, where it's been pointed out as the largest burial ground for Jews anywhere. But just the pain, torture, degradation, and sadism that took place there really represents about as low as we can go as humans. And Krakow, by contrast, not only the JCC there, but the resurgence of that community based on which really was sparked by shooting Schindler's List there in the early 90s, really helped that down on its luck sector of Poland to come back. In addition, they fulfilled the empathy piece of it by showing such grace and humanity towards Ukrainian refugees, which had been fleeing across the border into Poland after the Russian invasion. And there's been, I think you'll notice in the film, there's over 300,000 refugees of all faiths that the Jewish Community Center in Krakow is giving aid to now.
Now, of course, one of the things that you may actually that we all know is that there's plenty of Holocaust documentaries out there. So from what I gathered from viewing your film and what you guys are talking about is that you try to distinguish your film from the other ones by trying to present empathy and humanity. Am I
Very much
correct?
so. Yeah, because these are human traits. These aren't Jewish traits. These aren't German traits. These aren't, any nationalistic trait of any kind. But I've known, as I was a history minor in college, and I've done a lot of research since during my time as a filmmaker, that over and over and over again, you see this pattern emerge throughout history, centuries long, of constantly trying to create the other. You see, down as you see it in our politics right now, trying to distance one particular group amongst the population into a concocted enemy so that you can rally the rest of the population to your side in a falsified sense of emergency in order to gain power. And if you've ever seen the 10 steps towards genocide, it's a common thing that's passed around on the web, and we feature it for a moment in the film. Really, what I discovered through my research is that the tipping point, sort of the point of no return in that process, is dehumanization. When you start to identify a certain group as something that's not quite us, not quite human, sometimes literally animals, cockroaches, vermin, but sometimes their sheer essence too. And that knowing that empathy and dehumanization are, universal traits in humanity, we thought it was very important, especially, these last 5 years, to point out that we are all complicit in some way. We're all susceptible to being dehumanizers, to having even dehumanizing thinking or taking the actions, to being the perpetrators or the victims, and last but not least, the bystanders, which are really throughout history the ones who turned the blind eye when this stuff was so obvious. Those patterns, I think, are remarkable, and a lot of people don't know about them, and they certainly aren't covered well in history classes.
Well said. Well said. Tell us about convincing your participants for your film. A subject matter, a Holocaust, or any type of this kind of history is very tough for a lot of people to talk about, especially if they actually have these memories, from 80 to 90 years ago.
Yeah, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it is tough subject matter, but what's interesting is, and what originally drew us to this subject and this event, is the uplifting nature and the inspirational feeling of this ride, of this collective act of empathy of these bike riders, 250, 300, starting at Auschwitz, a place of darkness, and riding 60 miles to a place of light, the Jewish Community Center in Krakow. And that just the whole, what that represents is very inspiring. And even though we're tackling a very tough subject of genocide, of which the Holocaust is just one of many genocides, which we point out, and feel that it's important to look at the Holocaust in the context of history, not as an isolated element behind plexiglass, but to see it as in its place and examine what are the warning signs, what are the similarities, what are the differences. And it's not about comparing human suffering, but it's about identifying, what are the elements that cause these things to happen. So even though it's a very tough subject to deal with, the bike ride surprisingly has this uplifting energy and vibe to it that, is a thread throughout the movie. So even though we're talking about very intense subjects, there's also a very inspirational, uplifting element to the film, which was, we were all really happy about.
Yeah, we've been told by people that we screened for prior to festivals, pseudo focus groups, and then friends and relatives and things, that there's a lot of don't look away moments in the film. Some of the darkest moments that humanity is capable of. But the more we talked about those balances, the more we realized that both intentionally and not so intentionally, the ride moments are like this breath of fresh air, this release that you have after watching so much pain and degradation take place. And the one thing that kept us moving forward is we're always working toward something of a, lack of a better word, a solution. A conversation piece at the very start, a conversation starter about why do we continue to do this? Why can't we stop? Why do we continue to say never again, but we never seem to mean it? Why do we build these monuments for the dead, but we don't work on the existing living now and bringing common humanity back into the conversation? So I interviewed Marcel Zielinski in Montreal. That's where he was living the year of the 2019 ride. And to your point about breaching these extremely sensitive subjects, I had never interviewed a Holocaust survivor before. It's probably the most nervous I've ever been because it's always possible to say something that's insensitive or something that takes for granted. How many times he's told this to other people. I found myself pulling things out of him that he had never mentioned in his many, many, many media interviews before. He's become quite a spokesperson, as soft-spoken as he is. But you just have to make them comfortable and be as respectful as you've ever been to any human being you've ever met, because these people, these survivors, God bless them, have seen things no one should ever see. They've been through things no human being should ever have to encounter or suffer through. So you always kind of have that in your mind, knowing that, yes, we're all common humanity, but the little things that I moan about and groan about every day, even the most extreme things in politics, are nothing compared to what these folks have encountered.
So true, so true. Tell us about the production logistics of filming, the ride for the living. This 4 day ride, 60 mile. Is it 60 miles through Europe? I mean, how did you folks pull this off? Did you pull it off in a day, or did you film it 4 days, or you were following certain subjects through this ride?
Well, the ride was one day, but it's 60 miles, and it's with rest stops in between. Mark can speak more to how many cameras we had. I lost count, but it's like shooting the Titanic.
What I will say is that as when I mentioned before, that the project grew in scope and size. The initial idea was maybe one camera, a couple of interviews, follow the ride, boom, we're done. But as more we researched and scouted and went there, and the ride actually is through the Polish countryside. It's pretty magnificent ride of trail. And we really felt, to really capture the essence of it and make the audience feel like they're part of the riders, that we really needed to go all out. So we had cameramen on the backs of motorcycles filming. We had GoPros on some of the riders. We had drones. We had stationary cameramen along the way. So I think in all, we had about 20 different cameras shooting, because we really wanted to get a multi-dimensional experience to give the audience that they really felt like they were a part of it, both the POV of the riders, the countryside, and also to kind of let you inhabit this environment and this feeling, so that you could start to empathize with what the riders were actually feeling and thinking, following the trail of a man who did the same walk. He walked the same path when he was 10, being liberated, and now you're riding it. And a lot of common things that people said were things like, whenever I felt like I was getting tired or I couldn't make it, I thought of that little boy, and I said, if he could make it, I could make it. So the whole process of creating empathy for what people have gone through, as well as what the riders are going through, and lets the audience empathize with that as well, was an exciting process. And we were very fortunate to have executive producers that were all on board when the scope grew to get a more cinematic experience. But the whole process of the bike ride, of the movement, it was all very much a metaphor from this whole journey from darkness to light. So, doing it with so many more cameras and so much more depth, I think really paid off. And, you'll see that in the film.
And we tried to keep it as dynamic as possible, but we had always envisioned even before we, in the first second of footage rule, that we would be cutting in and out of it to some degree. We didn't know exactly what the pockets would have in it. We knew it'd be some talking heads. We knew it'd be a lot of academics. We knew it'd be a lot of archival footage. But you know, there's a balance. You got to keep the audience engaged with a certain level of energy throughout. And even when, you know, you have sit down interviews with some of the, probably, I think it's a stellar cast of academics, frankly, the way they describe history, as I've rarely seen it described in documentaries. But then we also, I think we may be the first film crew to ever have documented an actual tour of Auschwitz-Birkenau as well. It's been a forbidden thing in the past, probably for good reason, but we got permission at the last moment. And part of the ride event, that, you know, there are 4 days of the event. You know, you have the tour on one day, you have the actual ride on one day, you have tours of cemeteries in Krakow, of very historical points of interest in Krakow, which is an amazing city. And there's several other events during that 4-day period, but the ride itself, one long day, tiring as hell. We did it in 2023. Our daughter, Lisa and I's daughter, did it. She raised money for it. It's a tough ride. It's not a lot of hills, but it wears on you after a point of time, and you begin to think, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And that's one more aspect of Marcel's journey, I'm sure. I mean, imagine this kid was walking in the dark half the time, and you know, explosions going off around him, sleeping in barns, and you know, being chased by God knows who. It was what we went through was nothing compared to what he went through.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for answering the question. I was going to ask about the question about your footage that you managed to get on the tour through Auschwitz, because you don't see too many of those type of footage. And I'm assuming a lot of the other footage is public domain footage for the Holocaust that was used in the film.
Sometimes public domain, sometimes fair use, sometimes acquired archival. I mean, we have over 900 archival photos and clips in this film. And that in itself was a pretty exhausting endeavor. I took the lion's share of it on myself, knowing that, you know, you don't want to be see and say, but at the same time, you want to dimensionalize what some of these really compelling narratives. Michael Berenbaum, especially engaging storyteller when it comes to all things Holocaust. He's one of the curators of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And we got a wealth of footage from inside Auschwitz. And I think one of the special things about it was you see the expressions of the people going through the tour. You see the anguish that they're feeling as they're walking through a crematorium, or they're walking through a shower and then next door to the crematoriums, and being told in very specific detail what happens to you. What happens to you as a victim? What happens to your remains? And we always tried to tell. You may have noticed this as well, in the archival bits that deal with other genocides as well as Auschwitz. We always try to tell the story in a second person narrative, as though you are there, because it's very easy. Very, very easy. And that's another piece of research that stunned me, is just how numb we become to numbers. I mean, that's a coincidence that the numb is in numbers, but when you say 6 million, it just kind of flies right. A lot of people, some people will take a deep breath and gasp, but most of the time you just cannot comprehend that any more than you can comprehend 800,000 Rwandan Tutsis being killed in 90 days by hand, machetes and clubs. And any of the other horrors that we talk about. So we try to put it in the sense that, you know, you're a 10-year-old girl in Phnom Penh, or you're an 8-year-old boy in Rwanda, and on and on and on. Or you survived a massacre of Native Americans, or you're on a slave ship from Western Africa. These are all things that we need to force people to confront. And our hope too, starting this conversation, is that our education system will begin to pick up on this and really drill down on these, and not let them become whitewashed, because That's one of the contemporary aspects of this film is that education is just getting butchered in the United States of America. And detail is too much, I guess. People want to feel pride without accountability, which is it's a delicate balance being an American, but I think the accountability piece needs to come back.
One other point, Gig, about your question about filming in Auschwitz. As Tim was mentioning, we were very fortunate due to some of our executive producers' relationship with the museum in Auschwitz and the actual Auschwitz Foundation, that we were given permission to film there. But also, what was really unique and to our knowledge never been done before, we actually had a survivor named Bernard, who was the man with the long white ponytail, who gave part of the tour of Auschwitz, and he was a prisoner there. So for the riders to be given a tour of this horrific place, but to be given it by somebody who was there, who lived it, who talked about the last time he saw his father and the bunk that he was in, was quite extraordinary. And I think we all felt a sense of privilege that we were witnessing that probably for the first time and maybe the last, because, you know, these people are all in their 80s and 90s and hundreds. And, you know, they're, as Michael Berenbaum, one of our interviewees, referred to it as they're 1 minute from midnight for being around anymore. So it was extraordinarily a privilege to not only film them, but to witness that and to have that as part of the film is, I think we're really proud of that element of it.
You know, when we were filming the Kaddish ceremony near the demolished crematoriums, I remember I looked over at one of our camera operators and he literally had tears streaming down one side of his face as he was trying to film this ceremony and people's reactions to it. And that, I mean, the entire thing moved me, but that I kind of, thank God I wasn't on camera. I lost it there.
It was definitely an emotional day.
Yeah.
And one major thing, you know, as the old saying goes, history always repeats itself. So something like this is going to be inevitable, especially with younger generation who can't, you know, you talk about the Holocaust that happened 80, 90 years ago. Younger generations can barely could even remember the Civil War that happened, you know, over a century and a half ago. I mean, aren't we just doing this like a repeated broken record at this point?
Well, that's one of the heavy pieces of subtext in this film is that not only is that ride itself an allegory for the, you know, that journey from the darkest to the lightest, it's an allegory for the entire species journey from our darkest instincts to our lighter instincts. But also, if you'll notice the way we do a lot of these, for lack of a better word, detours from the ride, is we represent history as a wheel. History is a, you know, there's an old saying, George R.R. Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones and God knows how many other things, has a famous quote, history is a wheel, for the nature of mankind is forever unchanging. And there are others who say history is an echo, history repeats itself. But I think as a wheel is especially poignant for a film that's all about people on cycles. And you'll see that it comes around and comes around and comes around again. It's never exactly the same, but if you're a student of history, or if you're even paying attention, you see those similarities. I studied the Holocaust in college back in the 1980s. It was an eye-opening experience for me. And the minute I started to see some of the things that were happening overseas and in Rwanda in the 90s specifically, and in Bosnia, all of these memories of what I had learned in school came flooding back to me. And then when I hear dehumanizing rhetoric being used in politics, again, it comes back to me, and it's so obvious and so apparent, but at the same time, it's so ignored.
I think, Gig, that one of the things that Tim and I were really inspired by and motivated by was the desire to really show the Holocaust in the context of these other genocides. Even we just touched on them briefly. It's important to just have an overall view so that you really can understand and get the point across that we need to intervene. Otherwise, if we keep going down this road, it's not going to be good. And we were very fortunate to have David Byrne and the Talking Heads give us, a great deal on their song that we start the movie off with, which is Road to Nowhere. And, as kind of a precautionary tale about humanity and having to get on the right side of this and not allow this to keep happening. And like one of the people in the movie states that our best chance of avoiding this from happening in the future is educating people so that they know what happened. Like you mentioned, people, young people don't even know what was in the Civil War, let alone, if the Holocaust even happened or how it happened or to what extent it happened. So Tim and I felt really strongly that educating people and laying this out in a, linear fashion gives them enough of the scope of this subject that we can hopefully, make a dent in this happening again.
But to build on that, to understand that it's a human problem. These things that happen, they are a human-wide phenomenon. It's not isolated to Europe, or North America, or Asia, or Africa, or anywhere else. Or those people had it coming, or these people are always killers. None of that is true. None of it's even remotely true. It's a human-wide problem. And as Timothy Snyder says in our film, we are all three things: perpetrator, a victim, or a bystander. But we're all capable. Every one of us is capable of being any one of those three at any given time. And we have to recognize that trait and that susceptibility within ourselves. I was asked by somebody, what's your call to action with this film? What do you want people to walk away with? What do you want the personal impact to be on someone watching it? And that is realize the danger of dehumanization. Don't partake in it. Train your mind not to think that way. And when you see it and you hear it, intervene, say something, stop it, because that does wear our psychology down. The more we hear a group of people called a certain thing or attributed to a certain kind of activity or trait, the more it whittles away in our humanity as well. And then at some point in time, we start to believe that, they do that stuff. So, maybe some stricter measures are called for. It happens. It happens to every single one of us. It's happened to our grandparents in this country. I'm convinced of it. In the 30s and 40s and 50s, as the Ken Burns documentary so well pointed out, anti-Semitism was rampant in this country, and it's the reason a lot of people didn't make it to these shores and didn't survive.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, gentlemen, I've taken a lot of your time already. Um, and um, and so once again, congratulations for your documentary For the Living. It's a new playing at Newport Beach Film Festival. What, this Sunday at 3 o'clock, and hopefully you guys will do more and more of these film festival circuits down the road. And it is an eye opener. Younger generation should actually watch it, especially you know, the witness and testimonies. I myself went to Cambodia and saw the wall of bones over there. So it is an eye-opening experience wherever it is all around the world. But that's our dark part of history. So thank you very much.
Thank you for
Thank
doing
you, Gig.
Thank
it.
you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Bye now.
See you Sunday.